What's up and welcome to the No One Is Watching podcast, where we explore high-performing teams and individuals, dig deep to find out what makes them tick. Whether it's in sports, business, the military, or everyday life, this show highlights the DNA shared by elite performers, the process through which they leverage that talent, and ultimately, it helps you apply those lessons to your own life, business, or team. All right, man. So it's been a while. Where are you these days?
California. Well, I met my wife when I was in Atlanta. She was at Clemson. That was back in, I DM'd her in 2015. We met in 2016, and then we started dating, got married in 2019, and then in 2021, we decided to move out to California, where she's from, because it was kind of a, eventually want to start a family, and it was something that, she's very tight-knit with her family, and so, we made that jump. It was something, and thank God I played in Florida the next 2 years to avoid some of those taxes, but other than that, California's great.
Yeah, I hear you. A little warmer than Ohio.
Yeah, much warmer. I mean, even Atlanta, like it was always cold, cloud, and gray, like in the off season. So, like by the time you get home, it's like you want to do all this stuff, and then it's just like there's not a whole lot you could do. Getting outside and throwing was like a pain. So, like being able to throw outside. I mean, for like the first 2 years we lived out here, there was literally never any rain. And then the last couple of years, it started raining a little bit more. So like that would impact us a little bit. We had to find an indoor facility just in case. But for the most part, it was me and you remember obviously Colby Allard as well. So we've been throwing partners for the last couple of years.
Awesome. How's Colby doing?
He's doing well. I think he's going to be a free agent again going into next year. So I'm hoping that he can stick with somebody. He doesn't go to the same path I went down.
I hear you. So you I know you're drafted out of high school in Ohio. Did you grow up in Ohio?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town called Bryan, Ohio. It's a very northwest corner. There's actually a couple of guys still in the game. I know Justin Hancock got drafted. We were close to each other. Art Warren, I think, is still playing from that area. But hopefully we'll have a couple of new ones come in. Cade Kern's a guy. He got drafted a couple of years ago at Ohio State. But I don't know how long. I mean, ideally he's got a rebound. But, being where he's at, I think he needs to kind of perform a little bit better. But for the most part, it's kind of, I'm hoping we have a new a selection of people coming through that area. I don't think there's been as many drafted or as many prospects coming out of Northwest Ohio. So I'm hoping that we will continue to see guys, showing up from there.
That's kind of football country, man.
Yeah, and even there, I mean, shoot, not just Northwest Ohio and in general, the athletics. Actually, the girls' sports have been really good. There's some girl from an hour away from me. My dad's gone, like they live in Toledo now, and he's gone and watched her. She hit like 700 last year with like 25 homers.
Holy cow. Okay.
An insane stat line.
Yeah, no kidding.
So like, I think and actually one of my friends actually just took over the high school sports, or the high school basketball coach, which is cool. And he sent me a couple clips of their guys that they have. And I was like, dude, these guys are way more athletic than we were. I was like, you need to make sure that you're letting them just kind of go out there and dominate. Because, Northwest Ohio is great, but you're obviously, it's a smaller area. So, like, you're not getting a lot of these freak athletes. And to have 5 athletes that can kind of run and jump, I'm like, you got to use that to your advantage and let them go dominate.
Yeah, no doubt. Did you play other sports as a kid growing up?
Yeah, I played a bunch of sports when I was younger. I mean, I played soccer, basketball, baseball, golf. I didn't do swim team, but we swam, did all that stuff. But I even ran cross country my 8th grade year, which was just so stupid. A couple of my friends did it 7th grade year. So I was like, oh, cool, I'll do it with them. And after about 2 weeks, I was like, what are we doing? So finished that season, never went back to it. But, once I was in high school, it basically just came into basketball and baseball. Honestly, golf was something I wish, looking back now, I wish of, but back when you're a kid, like to me, it was too slow. So I never got into it. And then once I was in my sophomore, junior, senior year, I started playing fall baseball anyway. And that's honestly what really helped me kind of put my name on the map was, I played for one of those scout teams and I had 2 really good falls with them. And that really actually helped me get connected to people to get me in a chance to get drafted.
Okay. Yeah. Was that eye-opening for you coming from Northwest Ohio? And then, you go in the 5th round of the Padres. I imagine you got to Arizona. It's probably your first taste of pro ball. See a different caliber of athlete, kids from all over the world. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so I think that obviously, like the nice thing about like what my dad, we always played at the highest level of like the travel leagues, like the USSSA, Perfect Game, all that stuff. We always played at the major league level, which is like their highest level of competition. And even though we were a group of 10 kids from a small town, like we competed pretty well and we had some talent. But we were exposed pretty young. So like I always played a year up as well. So I was definitely exposed to better kids than me. I was pretty undersized all the way through high school, and even through like high school, I was only a buck 70. So like it wasn't like I was this big giant dude like some of the guys coming out. So I was not fully formed into who I am now. But so I was always exposed to people better than me. So that definitely helped. But again, you're kind of limited in what you're seeing, even that area. And I do remember getting drafted. And then this was back in 2011 when they had it was the last year of you had to sign off on the agreement, all that type of stuff. So I was ready to go. We had a pre-draft deal ready to go, and then I had to wait and San Diego allowed me to throw things like that. I was pitching in games because they wanted me to stay sharp, and then the process ended up taking forever, so they shut me down from doing that. So then I had like a month and a half of just not doing anything. I was still throwing and things like that, but I mean, not getting in game shape, that type of stuff. So I showed up.
So did you obviously had a good relationship, I imagine, with the area scout from San Diego?
Yeah.
Right?
He ended up getting, so it was, Connor, he ended up getting oh my God, not hired, but promoted because of that draft, because obviously that 2011 draft for San Diego was pretty impressive. We had 17 or 18 guys make it to the big leagues, and we still have probably 8 or 9 that are still playing that are, there's probably still 4 or 5 from that class in the big leagues right now. So there was no superstars, but there was obviously a lot of good players out of that draft. And so when I got there in late August or early August, like I had to kind of restart, took a whole thing. And then my first outing went horribly wrong. Didn't even get an out. And then it was the first time I'd ever really done relieving. So like I basically started warming up 2 innings before I needed to. And just by the time I got out there, I'd thrown 50 warm-up pitches. So I kind of had to learn that one as I went. But obviously that didn't go well. Then I woke up the next day, my arm didn't feel good. So I kind of got shut down. And then I came back in instructs and was terrible in instructs. But it was eye-opening, right? So it was like the first time that I'd ever seen 95. Like our first rounder, Joe Ross, comes in. I'm doing the gun and first pitch 95. And I was like, oh God, I don't think I belong here anymore. So it was very
pretty good athlete too, Joe Ross.
Yeah. So it's like we had him, Hedges coming in. So like there was a lot of big prospects coming in. We had a bunch of like first round supplemental draft guys. So like all those guys came in. That's when I really realized like, oh crap, I was, drafted a little bit later out of high school. Like this is not entirely what you kind of expect. So, I already had the plan to do this. This is one of the things we had talked about between my family and the San Diego, that I was going to move out to Arizona and train at the facility. Because I'd never had real guidance, right? There's not like a bunch of, weightlifting people in Northwest Ohio that are specific to this. There's not these giant like tread. There's no drive line or tread or anything like that close. So everything that I did was kind of just, working out on my own and just kind of doing what I could. So I went out there, got under theirs supervision. I worked out there. I stayed out there all but like during the holidays. I put on probably 15 pounds, and then I showed up the next spring and I was sitting, 92, 95. And I can guarantee, as soon as they saw me in instructs and in my first outing, they probably wrote me off pretty quick. And then I came into spring training. I think that they appreciated that I stayed out there and worked, and then they saw the improvements. And then I think going in, I probably was going to be an extended guy, and I came out and was throwing the ball extremely well. Like I said, I was, sitting 92, 95, which was a 4 or 5 mile an hour jump from where I was in high school. So it was a big jump for me, just putting in that work. They saw it and they took a chance on me, sent me to Fort Wayne as the 5th starter. And then I had about a month that was okay. And then I really kind of took off from there.
Yeah. Did it surprise you how tacking on the velo that quickly? I guess it's your first probably, foray into obviously pro ball, but just sort of the professional approach to conditioning and diet and all of it. Did it surprise you that you saw that spike that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of you just had to kind of get into it. That was the nice thing about coming out of high school is like, and that was the one thing too. Like, there's a lot of guys. I think a lot of people that fail coming out of high school, and they're better at it now, right? I think this stuff is taught at such a young age, and these guys' mechanics are so clean now. They come out and they're so big. But for me, a lot of it was just adjusting to every 5 days. But in high school, the thing is too is being out in California, I think it's so stupid. They play 2 games a week. These guys throw once a week, and it's like, what are we doing? Like, why don't we play more games? In Ohio, we played 3 to 4 games a week. So I would start our big game, whether it was Monday or Thursday, was our league games. And so I would pitch on one of those days, obviously complete the game. I didn't go, I had one game that I threw like 130 pitches that I probably shouldn't have, but whatever, I was in high school. But like I usually was very efficient. So most games were somewhere around 80 to 100 pitches. And then on the weekend, I would throw like 3 or 4 more innings. So I was used to throwing a little bit more consistently than some of these kids coming out of Florida, things like that. And also, I will say I was not – I don't consider myself mature, but I know how to handle when it comes down to being serious, and I knew that this is a chance. And so I was not – I mean, I was also underage anyway, but I wasn't a drinker. I didn't do any of that stuff. So I was able to kind of keep my body in shape, doing the right things. I had to learn that we had a really, really good pitching coach. My first pitching coach is Willie Blair. I give him a lot of credit for helping me kind of get into this. And I also really appreciated the strength coach that I have. His name was Cliff, and he was awesome. And so I started working with him. I asked him a lot of questions, work with them, the trainers and the coaches. So I relied on a lot of people because I didn't know what I was doing. And so obviously San Diego had some really good people for us, and that was a big jump for me of just learning that stuff, getting used to getting treatment. And I will say San Diego was really good about that. They wanted guys to get treatment, whereas a lot of people had that old school approach that you only went in if you were hurt. And they did a lot of pre-treatment, which I appreciated because like when I got to Atlanta, it was like they were shocked I was in the training room. And I'm just trying to do maintenance, man. Like this is stuff that keeps you healthy, isn't it? So, I mean, I saw old guys that were James Shields made a comment to me one time in a spring training game because I was, 22 getting treatment. And he was like, man, I just rolled out of bed through 96. And I was like, but I want to hopefully throw hard for a while. And I was like, nah, and James Shields had obviously a way better career than I ever had. But like I saw guys and like I knew that, I think if a James Shields, like if he obviously, I mean, that dude was also a workhorse. So when you throw that many pellets, I don't think anyone can withstand it. But I wanted to make sure that I stayed healthy as long as possible. And again, that's a guy that he taught me a lot. When I was in spring training with him, he was great, took me under his wing a little bit. But I was like, San Diego was such a different mindset than that old school. Like you only went in when you were hurting. And I wanted to throw as many innings as that guy did, right? Look at the career Jake had. Or look at the career he had, and it was just like, man, this is something that I want to kind of do. I want to throw 2,000, 3,000 innings in my life. So, I can see what he's going through at his age. So I thought if I took care of myself from a younger age, would allow me to prolong my career a little bit, which I honestly, I'm very thankful. I never had arm injuries, and I think that some of the maintenance I did helped me.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, to hear a cold weather kid talking about how, you felt like you were more game ready than some of these kids coming out of California or Florida. You don't hear that. You obviously hear the opposite.
Well, they just don't. Yeah, they throw. So I think they throw once a week, right? You throw on a Tuesday and that's it. You throw your 110. It's just like coming out of college. Like how many guys come out of college? I mean, they come out of college and they throw all this. They throw once a week. They blow it out. But then, but in today's game, shoot, you only throw once out of 6 days, right? Like back, coming at. I don't think kids. I think I'm worried about. It's so much different now with the 6 games a week thing, right? Pro ball, like if you couldn't handle the minor leagues, like you weren't getting the big leagues. It used to be honestly harder, not from the standpoint of stress and that type of stuff. And I realized that real quick, but the minor leagues, you would have 8 off days a year and you were throwing every 5th day. So like, it didn't matter. Your routine was the same. You pitched every 5th day. So you had to like kind of work into that routine. And nowadays, the minor league guys, they throw once a week, maybe twice a week, but they're usually never throwing past 6 days. And so like now when you get to the big leagues, like you don't understand what it's like to throw on 5 days, like, cause you never do it anymore. And then, nowadays, how many off days, like for me, even my first year in the big leagues, like it was pretty much me throwing every 5th day. Obviously we had a few off days here and there, but it's just so crazy to me in the last decade, how much they changed. And that's where a guy like James Shields is like, that guy was a dog because he took the ball every 5th day. You look at Kershaw used to make 34, 35 starts in a year, because he would like move up a day and only throw on 5 days. So like those are the guys that I wanted to be like, and like take the ball every 5th day. And obviously I'm not, obviously there's plenty of good starting pitching, but it is a lot different now. How many off days, especially in the minor leagues, I worry about that stuff kind of coming in. And that's where some of the lack of starting pitching is coming from, is because it's just such a different game now. You used to have to really, grow up fast in the minor leagues.
Yeah. You go back and look, you don't have to go back that far, right? But you just go back to,
5 years.
Sandy Koufax, right? And
horrible.
You just look at what some of these guys did over a full season, innings and the games they throw, and you're like, how is that even humanly possible? And obviously, a lot's changed. Right? The structure of the game has changed. players are way bigger, faster, stronger, on average. Guys are throwing it a lot harder.
Yeah.
It's much more of a business, right? How was your, how'd your body hold up after your first year of pro ball? I mean, that's the piece that I don't think people can really appreciate is obviously it's the innings and the reps and things like that, but it's a grind just surviving.
Yeah.
Full season.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what thing is, like back then it was like you didn't have these off days. I'm telling nowadays, like it's honestly every Monday's off. Like your travel's very easy, so like it's not really that difficult to like last the whole season. But like when I first got in there, obviously you're throwing once every 5 days. In San Diego, they had a pretty strict innings limit for us. And towards the end of that year, my arm slot dropped a little bit. I started to get a little bit of not like elbow pain or anything like that, just a little bit of tightness. And so we kind of backed off a little bit. I still didn't miss any starts that year. I mean, that was the thing. I just got a little bit fatigued, right? First time I'd ever done it consistently. Because, in high school, it was like you would play, like we would start in March, late March, so like already a little bit behind. And obviously, you don't have spring training either. Like I'm throwing bullpens, but there's no spring training. So that's extra innings on top of what you're doing. So there's probably, in total that year, I probably threw 145 innings with spring training in the season. And that was probably a 40 to 50 inning jump from what I usually probably threw 90 some, I would guess, in a year. But there's obviously not the same stress of pitching in pro ball. But I felt like I handled it pretty well. They did a pretty good job of minimizing me. I mean, for a while, I would get pissed because I had games where I'm like, I'm 55 pitches in through 5 innings and they're pulling me. And I'm like, I got 40 pitches left. Like, let me go. I'm dominating right now. And you just get held back. But by the end of the season, I could understand it because I did start to, and that was how my first September was. It was like, oh man, like my legs just started leaving me. In September, the first time you make that jump too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of got, I guess a rough introduction of pro ball. You talked about just performance, then health, and kind of shut down.
Oh,
and then,
terrible.
And then you kind of hit the accelerator though pretty quickly. I mean, you got there pretty quick. You moved through the minor leagues pretty quick. You kind of were right on the doorsteps when you and I crossed paths, right? You were kind of right on the cusp of the big leagues when we acquired you. You got up there at a young age. You kind of, I know you surprised some people. I don't know if you surprised yourself, but cold weather kid who didn't have, the big physical major league arsenal, like coming out of high school or, you weren't a college kid, obviously. You got there pretty quick.
Yeah. I felt like, I feel like that was a testament more so to just kind of what my game plan going into it, right? My dad, I'll give my parents credit in terms of that. Like we had a plan to like get out to Arizona and make the jump and like get used to living on my own. It was the first time I did. And not that my parents did everything for me. I wasn't spoon fed, but obviously this, learning how to pay rent and pay bills and that type of stuff comes with being an adult. And so I did that very early on so I could handle myself that first season. It wasn't a shock to me doing all that stuff, getting it set up and just taking care of myself. But then I also give my coaches a lot of credit. Willie Blair taught me my slider, and thank God, because that basically survived my career. And I could always spin the ball in high school, but like my slider and my curveball were very similar. And honestly, my curveball was better early on in pro ball until I switched grips 5 or 10 times that year. And he showed me his first off, didn't like it. And then when I came back to it, it kind of started clicking. But yeah, I basically moved up that year really well. The next year, I went to high A, and it was kind of the same hitters as you face in low A. So it's like if you dominate on one year, why don't you need at some point need to make that jump? And they did it very early on, which was great. And then I got to double A. I had some, honestly, the one thing I look back on is I wish that they would have forced me because I basically got away with a 4-seam and a slider. I mean, I dominated right-handed hitters just doing that in the minors. And I wish that I would have done a little bit more in terms of like being forced to throw into righties more and to lefties. I did not have my splits against righties and lefties was pretty bad. So that was something, I needed to, I wish I learned it at a later age, how to throw sliders to lefties, obviously, being what I do, but that was something I wish early on I would have had a little bit better success on that. I could not throw a changeup for the life of me. This is before all the stuff now with, spin and how that stuff and TrackMan. So it was basically trying to figure it out myself. And I always knew it was a pretty bad changeup, but you try to work on that stuff, but I wish that I could have learned what seam shifted and that type of stuff was to change how I threw it, just based upon how I throw the baseball. And I think I could have found something with that. But again, the only things that I love my path and I love my coaches, but I do wish that having that technology would have been nice because I could have seen like, okay, this is why my changeup gets hit, or this is what I could do and really work on that stuff. I knew I had a good 4-seam. I knew I had a good slider. But but I could have worked on, a better changeup. I mean, I just had I could not throw it. But I also tried to pronate, which I found out later in life that I'm not a pronator. So that was stuff that you just didn't know about,
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago. It was more like, hey, pronate it. And it's like, okay, well, my hand's not a pronating hand, so I can throw a slider really well, but I can't throw a changeup. So, but then you have to change your grip to that. And that's stuff that nowadays, I think that's why guys' stuff is so much better, because they can, instead of trying to change the way they throw a changeup, they can just move they switch the grip, and it naturally does it for them, which is something that I wish I could have learned. But that was just, pre-technology back then.
Yeah. It's obviously a pitching coach can make a huge impact, right? But so much of that is just the aptitude, and to your point, just the physical. Can I rotate my hand this way? Can I manipulate the ball? I mean, do I have that dexterity? I just may not have that gift. I may not have that physical ability, and even if I did have it, maybe I don't have the, not every player, not every pitcher has the feel, has the aptitude to kind of adjust like that. So it was very squishy for a long time on which guys were going to be able to make that adjustment. You leaned in on the pitching coach, you leaned in on the individual, right? Like, hey, he's a smart kid. He's a good kid, like you just kind of try to surround it without that technology. And then obviously once you have that, it becomes a lot more tinkering than, it's a little bit more pitching lab mentality than it is like trial and error. Right. So where were you? Like,
I give both of them a lot.
Go ahead.
I gave both of them a lot of credit for getting me to the big leagues quickly.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about that. Like you're knocking on the door at a pretty young age, a very young age. Before you got traded, where's your head at, right? You have to be feeling pretty good. You had really good minor league numbers. You're a heartbeat away from the big leagues. Like most people probably think you're going to maybe not spend your entire career with the team that drafted you, but, spend some time there, right? Where's your head at?
I mean, because when Preller came in, right, Preller made a lot of switches. I had a lot of friends in my draft class get traded. And then I basically survived spring training. So there's so many people getting traded, which was fine. A lot of people in the offseason, they were making moves, trying to win, which was great. So like that spring training was really cool, having a lot of those guys like the James Shields, like Josh Johnson, like Tyson Ross, all these really cool veteran guys that I got to learn from was great for me. And obviously I think that was also, I would have loved to have those guys, and Cashner, like all these guys were great. So I survived spring training. I had some stuff. Mark Pryor actually was kind of getting me right. I had gotten a little bit into mechanical funk in 2020 or in 2014, just kind of lost myself a little bit, lost my athleticism, got a little bit too mechanical. And Mark, I give him also credit, was like getting me a little bit more closed off. We went back to a little bit more how I threw in high school. And that was right before the jump to getting traded to you guys. And so I was starting to work on that stuff. We had a plan in place when I got to El Paso to kind of fix the issues. All of a sudden, I show up to El Paso that day, take a nap, get a call. Hey, we're actually trading you to Atlanta. And I was like, what? So obviously it ended up happening 10 times in my career, getting released, traded, all that stuff. But the first time was definitely a shock. And it was like, all right. And so like you get off the phone, and I didn't really believe it. Check Twitter, see that my name's popping up, see who I get traded, because they didn't tell me who I got traded for. See that it's Kimbrel. And I'm like, holy smokes, this is kind of a big trade. So then at that point, I'm like, great. What do I got to do? Like the season's in 2 days. And I had all my stuff just now to El Paso. So then it's the first time dealing with like, how do I even do this? How do I get my car to Atlanta? Like, what am I supposed to do here? And so then you basically do that. I flew out probably the next day, had to set up all that stuff, and then obviously when you show up too, everybody already has their roommates, they have their places. And so now I got 2 days until the minor league season starts, and I'm like, where do I stay? Who do I stay with? Like, where do I live here? So there's a lot of stress that comes in terms of when you get traded, right? I had it happen a couple different times, and it just puts you behind the 8 ball, because most of the time you're planning for it, you're getting ready, you have stuff signed before you break. And so it's just like, oh, great. So you get there. Obviously, now I got to meet all new people, a whole new organization, get to know them. Obviously, when you get traded for somebody like Kimbrel, there's a little bit of sense of like, okay, I need to actually perform for this. And the nice thing is, though, is you had made trades before with, Max Fried and Jace Peterson and a couple other guys that I knew already from San Diego. So that made it definitely, when I got to the big leagues, that year to debut, having a Jace there for me was huge because of, the relationship that we had built in 2014. We lived together in AAA that year, and he was kind of going through it. So we spent a lot of nights just hanging out, just us two talking. So having a guy like that, who basically was one of my better friends in San Diego, already there in the big leagues with you guys, just knowing that one guy helps. And then having Cam that I got to know a little bit in that spring training as well, coming over in the trade, it just kind of helps that relationship and then getting to know everybody else.
Yeah, Jason's a good one, man. I always enjoy my conversations with him. He's a good dude.
Yeah, very good dude.
Yeah, so you come over to Atlanta, right? You get up to the big leagues. You have a hell of a big league debut against the Mets, right? I think it was 8 innings. Is that right?
Yep, 8 innings, 1 run. And then Jason ended up getting the game-winning hit in the 8th inning, which was sick. Yeah, it was a pretty epic night, to say the least.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that was like sort of your real, the trade, I mean, is your first like intro to like, okay, this is a business, right? And this is, It's one thing, to your point, like it's one thing if you get traded in the off season, right? Like, all right, I got a couple months to kind of wrap my brain around this, figure out the logistics. You're doing it like the day before you're supposed to like report, or show up for, in El Paso. That's a whole other ball game. And, it's another one. Like, and look, you were young and single probably at the time, right? You hadn't met your wife yet.
Yeah, I would have been 22 at that time. So obviously not having a family makes life a lot easier. Because like then having a wife when all this stuff was going on the last couple of years, it was like, honestly, I felt worse for her than it did for me because, for us, it's like, hey, it's just part of the game. I basically would live out of a suitcase. So it's like you just pack up and you're on a flight the next day and you just kind of deal with it. You get your car shipped, all that stuff. Then you got a wife. Obviously, she carries 7 times as much as I do. So then she's got to pack up everything and then get it shifted. And then she's stuck with, a lot of logistics stuff. Like she had to drive our car back from I got traded from San Fran. It was like, you're sitting up there in San Fran just wondering what's going to happen. And then we get the call going to Tampa, which is across the country, which is like, oh boy. So like she drove our car back down to OC and then she met me like 10 days later. So there's just a whole lot more when it comes to having family. So like, that's why, honest to God, this is why I didn't have kids, early in my career. I knew the hardship that came with that. And, that was a personal choice of mine to not, because I was like, dude, and especially where my career ended up, I'm very thankful I did not. Because I mean, it would have been hell to put kids through that many different trades and that many different cities and things, and getting situated would have been a mess.
Yeah, there's a lot, and there's guys that you hear about the guys in the big leagues.
They do it, man. I got nothing but props for them because it is not, even by myself and my wife, it's not easy. And obviously, when it comes to being release traded, right? You get DFA'd and the waiver picked up. There's that sense. Getting DFA'd is not the most fun process to go through. You get a little bit more numb to it as you go, but being told you're getting DFA'd is not ideal.
Yeah. So you hopped around a lot, right? You've been in like 9 different organizations over your career.
Eight, ended up being with 8 teams in the big leagues. I actually made a second trip back after Atlanta. I went to Cincy, and that didn't last very long, and then went back to San Diego and pitched really well for them for a while, and then went through about a month. I just felt like I could not catch a break in terms of balls finding bodies, and so obviously too, when you're a low level like that, you're not like you're a mid reliever. Like if you're not performing as a middle reliever, they just get rid of you pretty quick. And that's just kind of what ended up happening for a couple of times. But I was very blessed the fact that I got picked up. And I do think that was part of my, some of the good spots that I had with Atlanta, and the fact that I was a prospect gave me a much more chances than I finally found my footing in 2020 as a reliever.
Yeah, so you've got different perspective as you're going through it. I'm sure it sucks, right? And you're getting DFA'd and traded. Even if you get, even if it's a good situation that you wind up in, or a trade that you're, to your point, like you got traded for Craig Kimbrell, that's a pretty big deal. But you get a different perspective about it now, right? Looking back, like what did you learn from that experience? Getting, the transient nature of pro ball, right? You touched 8 or 9 different organizations. I'm sure you picked up a lot of different things, good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. You get to see, like, I was able to – I played in every single division, which is kind of cool. I don't think many guys can say that they did that. So I was played in literally all 6 divisions, and I got to see which ones I liked more. I mean, how many cities that my wife and I lived in together from the AAA to the big league side. Like, we got to see a lot of cool areas, travel a lot. I've definitely met more people than most people probably do. I mean, obviously, Edwin Jackson, those types of guys have played in 15 teams, but – I mean, you meet so many good people. You get to see so much more. You get to live in different cities, right? If you only play with one team your whole career, it's amazing. But to kind of get situated in different cities and different lifestyles, like I feel like you just kind of get to know a different realm of the United States and kind of figure out how people act in different areas, and kind of like which ones you like and which ones you dislike. And each team will have its own set stuff. I mean, it's crazy. Each pitching coach, each philosophy that each team has, and how they use people. It's so differentiating, but it's kind of cool to kind of see that and get to learn from a lot of different people and not just, one or two.
What about the off the field stuff, right? Like I want to touch on that in a little bit, but the stuff you're doing now, like going through, that's a unique experience, right? Going through, bouncing around, right? It'd be like having 8 or 9 different jobs in your first, handful of years in a workforce like that. That's probably not something you draw up, but looking back on it, you can pull some really unique lessons from that, I imagine.
Yeah, and I think for what I'm doing now with Elite Performance Medical, it's like I can kind of relate to people in most situations because, like I said, even coming up through the minor leagues, I mean, I've played literally pretty much all over the United States. And so I've been to every major city now with every team I've been into those cities, but also I've been to a lot of rural areas of the country. And so I have a connection almost everywhere in the country that I can say, hey, I played here, I played close to there, I know somebody from there. So I just know I have so many different connections in terms of where I've played, and like food and stuff. Like I always use food as like a connection of like if I talk to an athlete that's in the Maryland area, it's like, hey, how often do you eat crab cakes? Like every time I went to Baltimore, I had to make sure that I sat down and got crab cakes because they're definitely the best. And so I use food a lot of times and just kind of locations or cool things that I was able to experience in those cities. That again, if you played in 1 or 2 cities, you might get to visit those, but to actually sit down and spend a lot of time in each city, and again. If you play for 1 or 2 teams, you're going to nowadays you play more. But back then it would have taken 6 years to play in all the cities based on the travel. But now you play more, but you still only spend 2 or 3 days there. Most of the time you're just laying in bed because you're tired. So I was actually able to play in each division, which meant I spent a lot of time in certain cities that most people don't get to, like which gives me more time to kind of explore the areas and get to know those cities more too.
Yeah. Tell me more about what you're up to now.
Yeah, so it's Elite Performance Medical. So it was a guy from my hometown area, Northwest Ohio. We've known each other for 25 years. He branched around a little bit. He started in actually ticket sales for the AA team in Frisco, Texas, and then he went to selling Hawks tickets, and then med software, and then went to med device. Was doing his own thing for about a decade in med sales. We crossed paths a couple of times. He lived in Atlanta when I was there. He lived in Tampa when I was there, and then I basically. When I was teetering on retirement this year, I was kind of sitting there like, God, great. Like I thought for sure I'd be playing this year. Like I felt really good. I made the investment in Driveline. And I knew that, I couldn't walk away without giving it one more shot doing that. And I finally had some stuff click back into place. Like I felt like this was the best that I'd been in a long time, mechanically and physically, and just the way my slider was moving. So it was very frustrating in like January, not getting anything. And then I started getting a little more frustrated, and then I finally stopped playing catch, and I was like, oh, great. And I was like, I think I'm just kind of over it. And for me, I was not a superstar, so I knew I had to put in everything I had to go into the game to be at a high level. And I was starting to get unwilling to do that, which just wouldn't have been good for me. I would have pitched very poorly. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, I know you've done med device for a long time. Like, I don't have a college degree, but I want to get into this. Is there a way in? And so we kind of talked about that stuff. He pitched me the idea, which I thought was pretty awesome. We're basically taking athletes. We built the course and everything like that. It was a pipe dream in February, but he was like, we want to take transitioning athletes and get them jobs in the cities that they're from, because, guys like me or other people, it's like they want to get in med sales, but sometimes it's hard to get into. They don't have connections. They don't have experience, even if they're applying for an entry-level position. And a lot of athletes, they lose themselves in their identity in sports. And I do appreciate some of my teammates early on helped me to not, because when I was struggling with the Braves, it was more of a mental struggle than physical. I had the physical gifts, but I was not mentally strong enough at that age. And it took me a long time to figure it out. But they helped me at least separate the fact that if I had a bad couple of games, I myself was not a failure. I just failed at my job. And that helped me separate myself. But a lot of athletes that can't do that. And so when they lose that identity in sports, they don't have anything outside. They don't know who they are. They don't know what their passions lie. And so med sales is a cool industry that kind of gives them that purpose back. You get to help out surgeons, selling to high level people. You get to be in operating rooms, assisting in surgery in any way you can in terms of getting them the proper tools and making sure that everything goes smoothly. Obviously, you're not doing cutting, things like that, but it's a really cool, purposeful thing. You're out and about, you're interacting with high level people. You can make a lot of money in the industry. So it's something I wanted to kind of do. And so he pitched me the idea of doing this, where you basically take an athlete, you bring them in, they take an online course with us, and then we facilitate placement for them. in the area that they want to live, right? Because, as long as you live in like a major metropolitan area where there's hospitals, you couldn't do it in Bryan, Ohio, because there's one hospital and they don't even do surgery there, I don't think. So, but getting them as close as possible. And that was something I thought was really cool because it still keeps me around athletes. I get to interact with people that I enjoy. And it was kind of a pipe dream back then, and it kind of slowly started to build. We started to formulate, get a little more people. We ended up getting an inaugural class together. We did that. We did an orientation event in June, got them into the course. They did the recordings with us. 6 weeks later, we graduated them. Not everybody graduated because, again, it was the inaugural class. We knew it was going to take a little bit of a risk. And then, obviously the whole time we're sitting there like, okay, how is this going to work? Are we going to be able to do anything? Are we going to get any steam? And then we've actually been able to place 5 athletes. We'll have 3 more from that class next year. We've actually had a couple of minor league guys as well, so that we had within 2 months post-graduation, we were actually able to successfully place 5 athletes right away into that. The 3 other ones will be getting placed next year once their situations are ready for it. And then we have, a couple more, kind of get into the class as we go. So now it's a totally online platform. You can take it at your own pace. And so, we're just looking for athletes to kind of who want to get into med sales and want to be surrounded by other athletes to come in and kind of take the course. Because that's the cool thing about it is we knew the support in the community aspect, because that's really the one thing you miss is just hanging around with guys all day and just BSing and having a good time and, talking shit to each other, honestly. So like that's the stuff you really miss about the game. And so this is a way you can kind of continue to do that. And then you're also learning from, we know how important it is to have those veterans around you to kind of learn from, the ones that have been through it already. And that's the thing we want to have is as the athletes get through it, they can turn around and help the next generation that are going to do the same thing they are.
Yeah. So how much of that course is, brass tacks of med sales and sort of the real granular details that you need to know? Is that all of it?
Yeah, it's heavy detail. Yeah. So it's a really cool thing. It's obviously, it's about a 4 to 6 week thing. It's probably going to take them about 100 hours to complete. We have a lot of outside resources of like, other calls we've done with people that can talk about the industry. We have a couple surgeons that have done speaking, and then we got a couple athletes. I don't know if you remember the name David Peterson, played with Atlantis and AAA with us.
Sure.
He's been in Stryker for a couple of years. So I interviewed him and he kind of gave some insights into that as well. So we took a lot of people, and we're providing not just Telly's information, but a lot of people's to kind of help them gain the knowledge of the industry. And then also, we're number one, we're getting them jobs in the industry, but we're preparing them for the industry to like real world stuff. This is not like a sugar coated thing. Like there's a lot of good and bad to the industry. There's a lot of slimy stuff that happens, and we're trying to give them a way to navigate all of that, and then actually, have a plan of attack. Because basically what I equated to was like, imagine show up to spring training, right? And you haven't done anything in the whole off season, your arm's not in shape, all that stuff. Yeah, sure, you're eventually going to figure out you're an athlete, you're competitive, you're going to figure it out, but it's going to take you a while. But if you go in there prepared, you've done all the stuff, like it still takes me 2 to 3 weeks, like to get my body back in shape. It's got to translate to game shape. But because I have that initial preparedness going into it, it happens faster. And that's the same thing this course is going to do. Like you have to get experience, because you can't teach somebody how to go in an OR for the first time and then fully expect what it is. But you are going to understand a lot more, which is just going to help your path to success. And also, we're giving you guys tools to like grow territory and grow business and sales techniques that are going to allow you guys to maximize your return in terms of how many cases you cover, so how much money you can ultimately make. We're trying to give them, a financial path forward as well.
So why do you guys specialize with athletes?
So athletes, because we're doing both college and professional, but the med sales, typically athletes are very coveted in terms of any sales, but in med sales in particular, they like it because most athletes have an understanding of the body. They're not going to know the anatomy and stuff, but they're confident in who they are. Because in a surgery, right, it's crazy. I don't think people really realize that there's a rep in pretty much every single surgery that happens, especially if hardware is going in the body, because that's what they're ultimately selling. They're selling the hardware, the plate and screws that go into a human body. And obviously, the surgeons are very talented people, but they sometimes don't know how to use that product. And so they're going to ask you how to use it. Because if you're selling them, they're like interested in it. They like it. But it's not what they're trained on. It's just like switching stuff. So you have to actually kind of guide them in terms of like what your product does within the human body. They do it. They understand it. But you have to kind of teach them that ropes as well. And so like when you're in the OR, that's all the clinical knowledge. But again, you have to be confident enough to speak up. And athletes, we typically think that once they kind of know it, they're going to be more confident. It's making your own schedule. So this is not a handheld thing. You're not getting told what to do. Obviously, you do have support. You're in a team, that type of stuff, but it's really all on you. It's the same thing as sports, right? You are on a team, but you're also a very single member. If you don't handle your own business, you're not going to be there very long. So that's kind of the thing. Is it's just the hard work, the motivation, the self motivation. Because again, if you're not, you're never going to be successful in med sales, because you have to go out there and want to be successful and do it yourself and do things when nobody's watching you, which is what ultimately it takes to be high level successful in sports. If you're not willing to do that, if you don't do the work in the off season, or you're not taking care of your body, you're going to find yourself out of the game very quickly.
Yeah, I actually, I don't know if I can say I learned the lesson, but I was reminded of it just a couple of years ago, right? Like when I was getting out of baseball, obviously not as a player, but as an executive. And that was I played through college, got into it more or less right out of school, and did it for 15 years. So it's kind of all I knew. And you get out and you start, probably imagine similar to what you were doing over the last year, right? You kind of just have conversations. You're trying to figure out what you're going to do, or the paths that you're interested in. And you realize that the people, you do that for about a year, and you realize the people that you click with, the people that you stayed in touch with, the ones like, hey, I really just enjoyed my conversation with that person. Inevitably, 9 out of 10 of them were athletes or associated with sports in some way, shape, or form, right? And you maybe didn't even know that at the time. And it made me realize that all the things that drew me to sports, yeah, you love the specifics of maybe that individual sport that you play. But it's all the things you just touched on, right? The pieces that comprise being part of a team, the actually enjoying like the grunt work behind the scenes and the discipline that it takes, and seeing those results, right? You putting on muscle and putting on velo pretty quick as a teenager, all these things that you're like, man, I kind of took that for granted because it was my life for so long, right? I imagine you probably had the same thing where you like, where I'm going with this is I remember talking to a kid who was an athlete, and he's graduating, he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. And I'm like, look, don't undersell yourself on sort of the DNA you have as an athlete, right? Like you don't know anything about anything, right? You're not expected to. You're a college kid. Nobody has any idea what the heck they're going to do, right? That's okay. Yep. But, I guess what I'm saying is I realize that not everybody has that, right? Not everybody has that inside them, that you can just throw them in and they're going to figure it out. Maybe not immediately, but they're going to grind their way through it. And I said, look, just lean on that, man. Just don't. That is really a powerful trait to have. And obviously you did it at the highest level, right? So you've battled through things, you've had successes and failures, and you can relate to kids, whether it's college or pro athletes, right? It's like that. It sounds kind of corny, and yeah, they want them and say they want athletes in sales because they're competitive and disciplined and confident and all that stuff, but it's real. I mean, it's all you have to do is spend a little bit of time around people that aren't wired that way, and you realize like, oh yeah, no, this is very different. Different.
And that's what we're trying to help teach them too. It's like, not only med device, but like how to use your DNA into like the same, that's why we can talk to athletes, because it's like, I understand your process, right? I might not know your specific sport, but I understand, I probably know what it takes for you to be successful. And I can probably give you, if you're in gymnastics or tennis, like I can probably give you the same examples the same way I could with baseball, and like what your day-to-day life is. You really, people think that like professional baseball, it's like they're like, oh, you just show up at 5 and play a game. It's like, no, like I'm at the field at like 11 to 1 every day. We're there 10 to 11 hours a day. Like it's a lot of downtime, but it's like you have to take care of your body. The travel's brutal. Like it's not just show up and play every day and you feel great. Like by like July, August, you feel like shit and you're just grinding through it. But everybody else is too. So it's like, who can, grow up and do it. And that's what being a professional is all about. But that's what the one thing we're trying to teach them is like, you guys have these qualities that it got you to this point. It's like, this is how you can kind of use that same mindset in business that you have in sports, right? The doing the extra step, going the extra mile, that stuff that can make you more successful in outside of sports, just like it did in it. And it's teaching you that stuff, and then also giving them the ropes and understanding the industry. And now they're not just getting into the fire, right? Now they actually have a plan, and now they can use that athletic background and rely on all of that stuff to then find that success at a much quicker pace, than ultimately, ideally make more money because of what we're teaching them. And even if they get 5 or 10 more cases a year because of what we're doing, based on commissions, that's going to be a lot of money over a long period of time.
Sure. Yeah. And I've heard you talk about before, you touched on a little bit, like your rocky start in pro ball, but then kind of once you get off that initial, hurdle, you kind of took off, and it was kind of smooth sailing for you for a while. And I read something where you kind of wish that you had built up a little bit more resiliency and mental toughness earlier in your career because you didn't really struggle that much, right? And we actually did. You'd kind of aged out of it at this point because I think you were already in the big leagues or kind of up and down at this point. But we did some things to that exact end in Atlanta, right? Not wanting the first time you fail, which I don't think people can really appreciate. Like the first time you fail, there's 40,000 people staring at you and you're on national TV. Like that's hard, right? And so, can you talk a little bit about maybe how that impacted you in your career and then maybe how it impacts you with what you're doing now?
Yeah, totally. So like the failure stuff, that's something you have to really learn how to handle. And like, I went through, I had a terrible start and then I was really good for a couple of years. In 2014, I had a horrible start in AAA and I just didn't feel very good. But then I kind of, with Mark and a bunch of other coaching, I felt better. Obviously, the way my big league career started was great. My first 7 starts, I was pretty good. I had a couple wins out of there. My ERA was low. Like I was pitching well. And I was like, all right, this is great. And then all of a sudden, I just got everything pushed in. Like I went through that was kind of the testament of my first 2 or 3 years in the big leagues. I just could not get over the hurdle of the big inning, and I got slaughtered in a lot of big innings. And then when I would do that, I basically, after one bad start, it's like, okay, then 2 bad starts. That's the hardest part of starting pitching is the time in between. It can be great or it can be terrible. Like if you're coming off a high, you're pitching really well, like those 5 days are just gone. And you're just loving it. But then if you're struggling, it was like, oh my God, you think about it for 4 days. And then that build up by the 5th game, I've already talked myself into a negative mindset. And so that was the big thing that I had to learn is basically how to fail, right? Like that was the hard thing too, is like once you're in the minor leagues, like nobody cares. Like you get, you feel stupid if you give up a bunch of runs, but you don't have people tweeting at you. There's nobody, you're not seeing yourself on ESPN. Like nobody actually knows. You're not seeing your name in the paper. It might be the local news, but nobody reads that. So like when you get to the big leagues, you forget sometimes that you're on a big scale. Like when I had that balk off in 2021 or 2022, it's like you forget that like, oh shoot, I'm actually in the big leagues. Like this stuff is national news. So like when I see myself the next day in the newspaper, USA Today, of like balking off of like the 4th time in MLB history, I'm like, oh God. I'm like, you forget sometimes that you're on that stage, because you sometimes just get lost in it. But it's like that was the tough part for me. It was like failing on a big stage. Like when you're failing in front of people, and I ended up getting off Twitter, your Instagram. People started Venmoing, requesting you at some point. So like that's like with the gambling stuff now, I think that's honestly gotten out of hand. Because athletes, like they people get more pissed about you cost them money than you cost the team the game. A lot of it comes nowadays about the money aspect, and that's the one thing I do fear. Like think about, I couldn't imagine playing football with fantasy owners. Like that stuff would be so annoying if you underperform. So like they don't even care about how you play. It's just, hey, you affected my bet, or you affected my all that stuff. But it's something that definitely helped me as I got older. I learned how to kind of handle it, separate it. I still went through some times, like I had to, I still went through some dark times. In 2020, my mom had some health issues, and I honestly, and I wrote a piece on this on, on LinkedIn too. It's like I started fearing success, because when you're pitching at a high level, people expect you to do that. And then that stress creeps in too. It's like, okay, I can't screw up now because everyone expects me to be better. And so you have both sides of it. And obviously I lived through both, but when I got really good was when I just stopped caring about anything but like, did I, every single day I realized how important catch was, making sure that I felt ready to go every day. And that was like the mindset, was just like not just survive the day, but kind of thrive every day, right? Do the things I needed to do every single day to make sure that I was prepared for the game that night. And sometimes, honestly, it was doing less. There were times when I was in Atlanta, like when I was pitching well, you're young, you're dumb. You just start not taking things not seriously, but you just start messing around with some different stuff. It's like going to the range, hitting 5 bombs on the range and with a driver, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to try and cut this one. I'm going to try and fade this. And all of a sudden you're screwed up. And it's like, it's the same thing. And then it takes you a month and a half to get your swing back. It was the same thing for me with pitching. It's like, you feel pretty good about what you're doing. It's like, okay, now I want to add this, or I want to mess around with this. And all of a sudden your core stuff is gone. And then I would just get beat up, and then it would just take forever to get back to there. So it's like I learned to not do that and just focus on what I did and do it really well, which for me ended up being sliders and fastball command. But, once I got to that point where I like did that stuff and made sure I took care of that things. And sometimes it was less, right? If I was beat up, you know, how many days that you were beat up and you just get in bad habits because you're tired or something doesn't feel right, I would just scrap it. I either wouldn't throw, or I would grab a weighted ball and do about 10 throws just to get my arm. Like if I went back to back and I was down the third day, more often than not, I either just do some dry work to kind of get some blood in my arm, or I just took a couple plyo balls and did a couple of drills just to get blood in my arm and then not throw. Because sometimes if you feel really good, the last thing you want to do is throwing when you're tired and then start building bad habits. So I try to keep good habits every day. That helped me in the baseball side. But obviously, yeah, like just learning how to deal with failure and not viewing. David Goggins' books helped me a lot too. And I wrote about this stuff. It's like getting over the mindset that you're actually failing, but you're just attempting. Like you're getting better. As long as you're attempting, you're learning. The only real failure is to be too scared to try it. Like again, the whole man in the arena, this is all stuff I've been posting about. It's like it's pretty easy to sit back and talk, you know, crap on somebody if you're not actually out there. Like if you don't understand what it's like to put that on the line, and like pitch in front of a 5, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people, whatever it ends up being on national TV. And to take that risk of like, you might get, you know, if you get hit, you're going to take a beating in the papers and by fans and media. Like that stuff's not as easy as you think for a lot of people.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I'm staring at a man in the arena poster to my left here. So you're speaking my language, but yeah, I look that baseball is one of these sports too, where you know, like you can sit there and watch an NFL game. You're like, these guys are physical freaks. I can't compete with that. NBA kind of the same way. There are some people that will sit back and watch a Major League Baseball. Like, I can hit that. You're like, dude, no, you can't.
It's like watching a kicker. Like I could kick a 30-yard field goal. It's like, no, you can't.
Yeah, there's a reason those guys get cut so quickly because there's less than 30 humans on the planet that can do that consistently.
Yes. Yeah, that's the one thing. Like I still try to joke about it. And obviously, I play fantasy, but you know, I $20 fantasy, so I don't get mad. But I'm like, I can't even imagine how much like they act, like people like they put all this stuff into it. I can't imagine how much hate these guys take if they have a bad week in fantasy. But like, it's just, yeah, I mean, when you have that much scrutiny and things like that, and obviously again, like you're going to see your name and pop up, you're going to see your, you know, if you go out there and, as a reliever and you don't give up any runs for 2.5 months, you never hear your name in the papers. You never hear a peep about how good you are. But if you go out there after 30 straight innings and give up 1 or 2 runs and you get your name on ESPN, you blew it. Everyone's calling out, hey, you suck. You blew the game. It's like, what do you expect me to be perfect in this game?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, middle relievers are kind of the offensive linemen of baseball, right? Like you're only you could go on a great run and nobody's going to hear about it.
Closer. You never want to see your name in the paper as a reliever. You never want to see the press coming over to talk to you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's the capturing and sort of training for adversity and resilience, right? Like that's something that fascinates me because nobody's gonna when like the game's on the line or when the lights are on, like no one's going to seek out that resistance. No one's going to try to fail, but there's really no other way to learn how to get through that. Right.
Somebody has to,
you have to,
somebody has to do it. Every situation, somebody succeeds and somebody loses in sports, right? It's not like it's soccer, you can have some ties, but it's like, other than that, like either the pitcher's going to win or the hitter's going to win. And sometimes even having that mindset of me against you, in football, right? Like your job, and it's the same thing, right? So in football, it's like, if you think about the team, like your job is not to like score a touchdown if you're the offensive lineman. Your job is to block your guy, and that is who you're competing against. In baseball, too many people, like I did the same thing, right? I competed against myself a lot of times more often than I competed against. Like early on in my failures, I would compete against myself harder than I would compete against the people. Sometimes if I could like when I would get away and play ping pong, things like that, you stop worrying about your mechanics and yourself. You just play the game because it's fun. And honestly, if you can take that mindset into the sport, sometimes it just kind of frees you up. Like that's why so many guys, if you sometimes just like the movie Invincible, that type of stuff, like he just goes and plays on the background. Like when it becomes your job in a profession, it gets very serious, but sometimes you have to remember that it is just a game. And like you used to have so much fun playing it. And if you can enjoy what you're doing, I think helps a lot. And it takes some of that stress away that, it is just you versus him. And sometimes just when you're in those mindsets and you're nervous, you're scared, you're doubting, like you just try to do your best to think about just competing against your boys in the backyard. And you want to be the one that comes out on top.
Yeah, we've all been around those people, right? Like it can come across as, whether it's, athletes or in business, it can come across as cavalier, or sometimes even cocky.
She said, I actually, my wife told me that I had friends out here that didn't want to golf with me because I took it too serious. And I'm like, it's like my only escape now to do that. I'm like, I get it.
Yeah.
I was like, but it's like and I'm not like an unbelievable golfer, but I know what I'm capable of. And if I don't play to that standard, I just hold myself to a very high standard. And I'm a somewhat a perfectionist, but like, if I hit 3 balls out of bounds, of course I'm going to be dropping F-bombs and getting pissed off at myself. I'm like, I shouldn't be doing this. Like, my swing's better than that. So if I'm playing terrible, of course, like, I'm not going to be as happy or enjoy the round. If I get to the point where I'm so bad, I just stop keeping score before I explode. But like, yeah, that's the other thing. You just hold yourself to a higher standard. Like, I just expect myself to be good. And some things, like, I've never skied before. So like, I know I'm not going to be very good at that, but like, yeah, I'm going to get pissed off if I can't ski. Like, I'm going to feel like an idiot, and I don't like failing. So it's just something you have to get used to.
Yeah. But you touched on something a minute ago, right? It's the self-awareness piece of that, right? It's the doing less. Like that part's hard, especially for young people, but athletes, anyone. Like, the instinct is to press harder, do more, right? And that's the worst possible thing you can do most of the time in baseball, whether you're trying to hit a ball or you're throwing one.
Yeah.
So when you get around those guys who are kind of in that flow state, they figured out like where they need to be, plus or minus one, right? And it's like, sometimes it's going to be, I gotta take 100 more free throws, or I gotta do another, couple sets in the weight room. Sometimes it's like, I need like a 2-day nap and I'll be good, right? Like, but knowing what they need to do to perform at a high level.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I hated about pitching. That's what to me made it so hard, is I can't just go. That was the one thing I wish I could do. Like, I would have 100% done it. It's like, if I could go out and throw a 100-pitch bullpen when I was struggling, I would. But you just can't. Like, golfers, I got so jealous of golfers, like basketball players. I'm like, dude, if your golf swings off, like, I know it's really hard. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, at least you can go hit 500 balls in a day. Like, I can't. I have a very limited number of throwings, and that was what made relieving so hard to me, especially early on. It's like, if I don't feel good, like, I'm still expected to go compete tonight, and it might take me 2 or 3 weeks to like get right, because I can't throw that much every day. And if I'm pitching consistently, like, you just don't have time and the body to kind of throw. Because the last thing you want to do is beat your arm up and go into a game tired, and now your stuff's just not fresh. Like, you'd rather just take your chances going fresh. But that's a hard thing to do, is go into a game when you just don't feel right. Like, it's very hard to do. And obviously, pitching's in your favor and things like that, but it's still hard to like grow up and be like, I have to take what I've got today, just go with it and see what happens. It's hard to do. It was hard for me, and I know it's hard for a lot of people. Obviously, sometimes some guys make it look super easy, but you never truly know what's going on in somebody's mind out there.
Yeah, there's not too many that it's actually easy, right? Like, the ones that look, the ones that make it look easy are usually, it's what is it, like the ducks? They're swimming like crazy underneath the water. But yeah, man, it's well, look, that's I think that's a good place to leave off. I mean, that kind of lesson that you take away from being an athlete, obviously, is going to serve you well in this new venture with Elite Performance Medical. Knowing when you got to step on the gas and when you got to kind of back off, right? I mean, you can, even in sales, right? You're like, all right, am I gonna come on too hard with this guy? Should I back off, or do I press and try to seal the deal? Like, all that comes with. There's really, I mean, some guys I guess are just natural salesmen, but most of us probably need some reps to get to that point, right? So it's this very similar mentality.
Yeah, and especially trying to, obviously what we're trying to sell is just, it's different than most. It's not, I'm selling a product, but it's just like a different thing. Like, we're trying to sell the value of the course, and the fact that we are going to get you jobs, and trying to get them to not view us just as a glorified recruiter, because technically it's what we do. But obviously we provide just much more than that. And obviously the biggest thing too is we can be there for mentally, because how hard it can be for some people to transition. We can be that support group to get you guys through that. And if you miss it, you have people around you that are literally going through the same thing you are. Yeah. Well, that tribe sort of environment is, exactly. It's hugely valuable. Particularly for athletes who are used to being in that kind of spot. But Matty, good to talk to you, man. I'm excited to see where you go with this new venture. I'll definitely be following, and appreciate you taking some time today. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the No One Is Watching podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe to be notified of future episodes. If you'd like to support the show, please take a second, leave a rating and review, or share it with your friends. If you're interested in similar content, you can check out my website at nooneiswatching.com, where you can subscribe to the newsletter, read my blog, or
or follow me on your social media platform of choice. Look, your time is valuable, so thank you for lending me some.